Back when I was in 6th grade, I had a close-knit group of friends. There were 4 of us, all girls, and we hung out all the time. Sleepovers were a norm for us, and we would usually rotate houses since all our parents knew each other, and we all lived relatively close to each other, the farthest being 10 minutes away. One particular sleepover, we were at my friend Caitlin's house, and 2 of her cousins just happened to also be sleeping over. Caitlin had 2 older sisters and an older brother, who were all really nice and friendly. During our sleepovers, they usually stayed in their rooms and only came out for food, so we never really felt like we were imposing on them. Her brother would let us play with his PS2 sometimes, and his sisters would talk to us about boys and high school gossip, which at that time we thought was really cool. Overall, Caitlin had a great relationship with her siblings. I couldn't say the same for her cousins, though. One of her cousins was in 8th grade, and she was closer in age to one of Caitlin's older sisters, who was a freshman in high school, so she was staying in her room. The other one was a boy who was a junior in high school and naturally stayed with Caitlin's brother. The girl was nice, even if she seemed a bit shy. The guy, however, just gave me the creeps. He was definitely more outgoing, but something about his mannerisms was strange, and when he smiled, it looked like he was smiling at something he thought of in his head and not necessarily at you. He had shoulder-length, stringy, and greasy, dirty blonde hair, and he was pretty scrawny for a guy his age. He looked like he could also be a freshman in high school. Caitlin really seemed uncomfortable around him. Later on, when we were in Caitlin's room, she told us that she just recently met her cousins because their mom and her mom had a falling out for a few years and weren't talking to each other. They recently reconnected, so they thought it would be a good idea if Caitlin's aunt and her children came to visit for a weekend. Caitlin said that her female cousin was nice enough, but that she thought the guy was weird. Ever since he got to their house, he's been trying to hang out with her instead of her brother. He would go into her room and go through her toys and books to try to make conversation with her. He was also kind of touchy. He would pet her cheeks and her hair. When she would flinch or move away from him, he would get this really cold look in his eyes and would stare at her for a few seconds before smiling that creepy smile he does. We all agreed that it was really weird, but eventually, we moved on to other things and talked about the usual stuff 6th graders talk about. We ended up watching a movie before bed and took our turns to go to the bathroom in the hallway that Caitlin shared with one of her sisters. The oldest had her own bathroom in her room to brush our teeth. Everyone called dibs on their turn, and since I didn't really care, I was the last one to go there. When my friend Lucia came back and told me she was done, I was relieved because I was getting antsy and tired and just wanted to brush my teeth, lay in bed, and gossip until we all fell asleep. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the bathroom. I was so distracted that I didn't notice Caitlin's cousin in the bathroom until I turned the lights on. I quickly apologized and closed the door. At that point, I wanted to just leave and run back to the room. He was in the freaking bathroom with the lights off. From what I could see before I shut the door, he was just sitting on top of the closed toilet. Before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me, and told me to go on ahead. I really didn't care about brushing my teeth at that point, but I didn't want to run away and provoke a reaction out of him. I entered the bathroom and immediately locked the door behind me. I quickly brushed my teeth and did my business. This is when things get really creepy for me. I opened the door and he was still there, waiting, with a smile on his face. "Let me walk you back to your room." I didn't even know what to say to that. He took my silence as a yes, I guess, because before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and was walking with me back to Caitlin's room. His hands were really warm and sweaty, even though he didn't look like he was sweating or even remotely warm. I felt so numb, and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I was going to pass out. I swear that hallway has never felt so long. When I got to the room, he let go of my hand and said goodnight, going back to the bedroom he was staying in, which we passed before we got to Caitlin's room. I walked back inside, and I guess I was making a face because my friends all came up to me and asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened, and they all agreed that it was super weird, and Caitlin said she would talk to her mom in the morning. I hoped that it all ended there, but it didn't. As a rule, we weren't allowed to lock doors during sleepovers. It's usually fine, but not in this instance. I had to have been sleeping for a few hours when Caitlin was shaking me to wake up. Apparently, she had been up for a while, and with me being the closest to her, I was the first one she ran to. She then told me, with her voice shaking, that her cousin had opened the door to the room twice already and would stare in the room for almost a full minute before quietly closing the door. I was really frightened when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep throughout the night. I agreed to jump into Caitlin's bed with her and waited. It didn't even take that long when I heard the door open. We both just froze and stared straight at the door. There was no light in the hallway, and the only source of light in that room was from the moon outside, but we could still see a silhouette of someone's head peeking through the door. We could feel his eyes on us, and he was just staring into the darkness of Caitlin's room for a few seconds. We were trying not to move so that he didn't know we were awake, but it didn't matter. He let some air out of his nose as if he was trying not to laugh. "Hey, Caitlin," he whispered, and then just closed the door. Caitlin looked like she wanted to cry. She grabbed onto me, and we just held each other and waited until he decided to come back. He never did end up coming back. I guess it wasn't as fun since he knew we were awake. We never ended up going back to sleep that night, though. The next morning, my mom came to get me pretty early, and I said my goodbyes. I was glad Caitlin's cousin was still asleep. When I saw Caitlin in school, I asked her what happened when I left. She said she told her mom and that her mom was really concerned and said that she would talk to their aunt. I guess she told my mom about what happened to me too, because she asked me about it later on and was prying to see if anything else happened to me. After that, she made sure that Caitlin's cousins were not around before allowing me to sleep over at their place. She didn't have to worry though, because they never came to visit after that. I was 14 at the time. I had a friend I'd known since I was around 11. She was 4 years older than me herself, so she would have been 18. Despite the age difference, we'd always been close, but she'd recently moved out of the city only to move back again and begin living with her aunt. Being back in town and not having seen me for a while, she invites me over to spend the night, and I agree. The walk there itself was creepy enough, as she lived a fair ways away still, even being within the same city. A homeless man chatted me up at the first streetlight, and people catcalled me from their porches and hollered other kinds of obscenities. I basically walked the entire way there, terrified as hell before I even saw her, maybe like 10 minutes away from her house. I believe we were walking down the street when she stopped at a friend's house to say hello. But he wasn't just a friend. He was some guy that was actually interested in her at the time. Anyway, we end up staying a while, and she tells me we'll head back to her house soon. Fine, okay. Anyway, the dude starts commenting on how little and cute I am, specifically my hands, and at this point, I feel a little creeped out, but write it off anyway. Eventually, it gets pretty late, and the dude suggests we could spend the night at his house. Obviously, there is no way in hell that I want to do this, but she convinces me anyway. Even convinced as I was searching for any possible opportunity to get out of there. Could I call my grandpa to come pick me up? No, it was too late, and I didn't want to bother him, especially to come pick me up from some random dude's house late at night. And I sure as hell wasn't walking all the way back to my house late at night in the dark. Especially not after what I'd experienced on the walk there at merely 7 p.m. Eventually, we all go sit on the waterbed and watch a movie. I'm trying not to fall asleep at first, basically just because I'm uncomfortable and just don't want to. But eventually, I get really tired and fall asleep anyway. Later, I wake up for some unknown reason to find both of them still awake. My friend tells me it's okay and that I should go back to sleep. I don't argue. As soon as we wake up the next morning, I have her walk me home, not wanting to stay any longer than I already have, and we go. Later, my sister tells me that my friend, who was actually friends with us both, closer to my sister's age though, had sex with that guy that same night while I was sleeping on the bed next to them. Multiple times. Needless to say, I was pretty disgusted. I saw the guy a few times after that around town and school grounds, and he'd just smirk at me. Definitely the worst sleepover of my life. This story happened back when I was in 5th grade in 2005, when I lived in western Montana. My bedroom was shared with my 2nd grade sister, and we had a king-size bed that we shared. To describe my house a little, our room was facing the backyard, but was a basement room. Basically, standing up looking out the window in my room, I was eye level with the ground outside. Up and to the left above my window, I could see onto our deck, which looked into our upstairs kitchen. Kind of confusing, but bear with me. Anyways, this particular night my sister and I were having a sleepover, and our friend was in the bed with us. When we were falling asleep around 1 a.m., our friend woke us up to show us that a deer was on our deck. We looked out, and we all saw a deer on the deck. This was normal in Montana, so we laid back down. I guess my friend stayed up staring at it, and she woke us up about 5 minutes later saying she thought it was actually a person. Right then, we looked, and we saw the shadow move a little, and it was clearly a tall person's silhouette. We started freaking out, and then we saw 2 green laser lights. They were just 2 small pinpoint lights that were coming from the guy's head area. We all thought it was binoculars. At this point, we were on high alert, and our eyes had adjusted a little, and we saw it was clearly a guy looking into our kitchen window. I was too scared to go tell my parents all the way upstairs and past the view of the guy looking in the window, so we used my friend's cell phone and called the home phone. None of us owned cells at the time. It rang loudly, and we watched the guy run full speed off the deck. As soon as he ran away, the 3 of us ran screaming upstairs and told my dad. He called the cops, and they searched the streets but never found the guy. Now here's where things get weird. So just 2 weeks earlier, the town's police station sent around notices in our neighborhood, telling us that a person of interest and dangerous sexual predator who had a warrant for his arrest had been spotted in our area. A tip had said he was staying with a family member 3 streets down from us. I remember this because I remember my mom, who is a bit paranoid, drove us by the address of the house on the notice one time and made us very aware that this was going on and would not let us ride our bikes outside during this time. I remember looking at the house every time we drove by. Turns out, maybe 2 or 3 months later, this same man was apprehended for the kidnappings and abuse and murders of 2 children and killing their family in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Only 2-ish hours away from my house. In some of his interrogations, he confessed to stalking the kids by watching their homes at night with what? Night vision goggles. The same green lights we saw that night. I also one time found some obscure website that had some of his writings where he discussed living in Montana at various times and discussed that right before killing this family, he was searching for children to kidnap. We were the same ages as the kids he kidnapped.